Thanks a lot to the Ecological River Watershed Association for having me. I'm glad to be here today. I'll chat a bit about the benefits of dam removal, at least some of them. There are many and every project is unique, but I'll touch on kind of the high level ones that typically apply to most projects. And as Marissa said, I'm with the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration, which is within the Department of Fish and Game, and I'm a project manager within the dam removal program at DER. So I'll start, if you don't mind going to the next slide, thank you, with the ecological benefits of dam removal, and can keep moving there, Marissa, thanks. So to talk a little bit about the ecological benefits of dam removal, I'll just first talk about what a healthy stream looks like and how it functions, how dams disrupt those basic functions of a healthy stream, and then how removal restores those healthy stream functions. So a healthy stream system is free flowing. So it looks like this, you have your watershed with tributaries and main stem that flows out to the mouth of the river. In the Natural River Watershed, that might be where it flows out into the Merrimack, or where the Merrimack flows into the ocean, and the water can move freely from upstream to downstream, from rain and groundwater to the downstream and mouth of the river. And then because it's free flowing and the water doesn't get backed up or stagnant behind a dam, that results in lower temperatures overall, typically within the watershed and in the tributaries. In the Natural River Watershed, there are a lot of cold water fisheries, which are important resources for certain species of fish. So, these free-flowing streams maintain those lower temperatures, and with lower temperatures and faster moving water, you have higher dissolved oxygen, which is good for fish and all aquatic life. That free flowing also allows for the movement of sediment transport from the tributaries down to the main stem and the mouth of the river. And with that sediment, also nutrients are transported both within the water and also within the sediments. And all of those things combined, next slide, result in healthy wetlands and floodplains. So as you replenish the sediments and nutrients into the lower, flatter valley parts of the watershed, you have these healthy wetlands and floodplains, which provide habitat and also provide flood protection and opportunities for water to fill the floodplains during high flow events. Also, this allows for fish passage upstream, so either from larger rivers like from the Merrimack up into the Nashua, or from the Nashua up into tributaries, or from the ocean up into the watershed. Fish can move upstream, and this brings nutrients from lower parts of the watershed up into the higher parts of watershed. And not just fish, but many other organisms move upstream, either hitching a ride on fish like mussels do, or being carried upstream by other means and other aquatic organisms. And then, of course, we have fish passage downstream. So all of the nutrients and habitat and everything upstream supplies an area for wildlife to grow. Fish is one representative one, but it's not just fish that pass downstream, it's many other organisms as well. Also otters, turtles, lots of other aquatic organisms. And this movement of all of those aquatic organisms, both up and downstream, allow for the balance of the food chain and the support of the food systems within the lower part of the watershed and the upper part of the watershed, and for those to be connected. So now let's take a look at what this looks like with a dam in place. So you no longer have a free-flowing system. Water gets stagnant behind the dam and spends a lot more time behind the dam. As a result, temperatures rise in the water behind the dam, and that means that temperatures that flow out of the dam downstream are also higher than they are in a free-flowing system. And also, with higher temperatures and slower moving water means lower dissolved oxygen, which is challenging for different aquatic organisms to survive in conditions with lower oxygen levels. You no longer have the same sediment transport regime, so sediments can get stuck behind the dam. They do move downstream during really high flow events, but less often, and they kind of travel more in pulses. So you have a lot of sediment getting trapped behind the dam, and with that sediment are also nutrients that get trapped behind the dam. And all of those things can cause water quality issues, algal blooms, eutrophication, and other issues in the impoundment behind the dam. And then, of course, you don't have the same amount of fish passage. Next one, please. Oh, sorry, I'll mention also the wetlands and floodplains. So without that replenishment of sediment and nutrients downstream, you don't have the ability to build those wetlands and floodplains and vegetated buffers along the river. And of course, behind the dam, your wetlands and floodplains are impounded and underwater. So fish can't pass, fish and other aquatic organisms can't pass upstream, and also some can pass downstream, but not all. So you have limited fish passage downstream as well. And so ultimately, this is what your dam stream system looks like, with a disruption of the flow of nutrients and aquatic organisms and water, both up and downstream. So when we remove a dam, we restore all of those ecological benefits that a healthy river system provides. So restore that natural thermoregulation of temperature, which improves water quality and increases dissolved oxygen, restoring the natural sediment and nutrient transport regime allows for healthy floodplains and wetlands, replenishing the downstream areas. You have habitat connectivity up and downstream, and by removing the impoundment, you restore the benthic and other biodiversity in the stream. So all the macro invertebrates that much of the aquatic life lives on and needs to survive can be restored in the stream system behind the impoundment, behind the dam. So I'll talk a bit about the financial and public safety benefits of dam removal. So this is really relevant for, I think, many of you who are either municipalities that may own dams or individual private dam owners. This is really where, the benefits probably are most important to you. So this is a project of ours out in Western Mass. This is a dam that we're working on to remove. As you can see, the dam is damaged and degraded. So there's a big concrete block that's fallen off the face of the dam here, and there's water coming over one section of the spillway. During high flow events, you can see on the left side of the picture here, at the bottom of that retaining wall, water has been undercutting that retaining wall, which weakens it. What you can't see to the left of the picture is that retaining wall is part of a culvert. There's a road just off the picture to the left. And so this dam requires a lot of maintenance to get it up to par with what the Office of Dam Safety requires. And so that's expensive, and it's can be one time, but really it's ongoing consistently that maintenance is required. So there's the financial need for that, and there's also inspections that are required. If your dam's in particularly bad shape, you need inspections more often. So this is one of the financial liabilities of being a dam owner is the inspection and ongoing maintenance costs. Then, of course, there's the risk of dam failure. So both the safety hazard of what happens to the people and infrastructure and everything downstream, but also what happens to the environment and environmental resources downstream. So this is a dam that broke in Michigan, and recently it was found that the dam owner is liable for $119 million in environmental damages due to that dam breaking. That might sound far from home in Michigan, but this is definitely a risk still here in Massachusetts. If you go to the next slide, this is a dam in Hinsdale that broke earlier, I believe it was earlier this year with the big rains that we had this summer. So the dam owner was liable for some damages to roads and other infrastructure downstream. So of course, there's the concern, the financial and liability concerns for if there's a dam breach. This is another project that we're working on. This is the Talbot Mills Dam in Billerica. And this dam on the left side is the left side of the dam, and the picture on the right side shows the whole spillway of the dam. So this dam currently doesn't pass the flood size that's required by the Office of Dam Safety. So in order to bring this up to meet the Office of Dam Safety requirements, the dam would either need to be widened or raised, or probably a combination of the two. And as you can see, it butts right up against infrastructure. So undertaking the project to bring this dam up to meet the Office of Dam Safety Standards would be a huge undertaking in terms of how you could do that with the road and other infrastructure nearby. Additionally, this dam is one where there's a diadromous fish population. So this dam's required to build fish passage, which it doesn't currently have. So a fish ladder would need to be built, or some kind of fish passage, which is expensive and a lot to maintain. So during the migration season, a fish ladder or other means of fish passage needs to be monitored every day to make sure debris doesn't get caught in it and fish can pass and all of that. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that dam owners have to face when making decisions about what to do with their dams. And then all of those things become more challenging and more difficult under climate change, under conditions of climate change. So this past summer, we saw some of the biggest storms on record in Massachusetts. I'm sure everyone remembers, you know, what happened in Leominster with the big floods and the issues with the dam there. And so even if, you know, you bring your dam up to Office of Dam Safety Standards and it meets all of the regulations and it's the right size and it passes the right flood flow, we're now starting to see floods that are way bigger than any of those that the standards are predicting or require. So even given all that, there still are risks with the massive, massive floods that we're starting to see and will continue to see more often. So all of that becomes more expensive and higher liability costs. So all of that is about the challenges and some of the financial and public safety situations and challenges that dam owners face. So dam removal, therefore, kind of relieves those financial and public safety risks. So elimination of maintenance, repair, and inspection costs, elimination of the potential for dam failure, reduction of upstream flooding, which I didn't talk about too much in those examples, but is, you know, oftentimes dams are thought to remediate flooding or protect from flooding, but most of the dams in Massachusetts are not built that way and don't operate that way, and they actually increase flooding upstream behind the dam. Elimination of the need to build and maintain fish passage, and then they provide increased climate resiliency for the communities and the people living around the dam and for the dam owner. And long-term ends up saving money. So dam removal can be expensive. There are opportunities to fund it through grants, but long-term, it's usually cheaper than undertaking all of these other risks and costs of owning a dam. And lastly, I'll just touch on some community benefits of dam removal. Of course, all the public safety benefits and the climate resiliency benefits are major benefits to a community surrounding it that it is living nearby a dam or uses a road transport or access near a dam. But there are other ones too that often I think municipalities it's important for municipalities to consider the opportunities of having these co-benefits of dam removal. So this is a project on the Tiche River. You can't see my my pointer here, but you can see where, if you go back one, Marissa, the impoundment is, yeah, this, the impoundment behind the dam. So the river on this slide runs from the left side to the right side. So that impoundment there, just, yep, where your mouse just was is where the dam is. And so this dam was just removed this summer, and the town is using it as an opportunity to build some public access and trails in the former impoundment. So if you go ahead and click, so this is one of the designs for that trail system. So they're putting in a trail along the river, a walking bridge over the river, some trees and other restoration within the former impoundment to kind of create this floodplain park. Next one. So this is a similar example. This is on Abbey Brook on the city of Chicopee. This is a series of 2 dams that's located in Zott Park, right in the city. So both are being removed, but the lower one is being removed first. Actually, it's underway right now. And so similarly, they're building kind of a floodplain park within the former impoundment. If you click the next slide. So you can see through the former impoundment, there'll be a new channel, and along that, some different trails and trees and other public access points. So just high level, some of the community benefits of dam removal, opportunities for public access, developing these kind of park and floodplain improvements, and improve fishing and boating. So with all of the ecological improvements and habitat improvements, of course, you'll have a higher population, hopefully, and a healthier population of fish, which makes recreational fishing better, and restored natural beauty as well. So I think I'm probably close to my time, or maybe past it. These are just a couple before and after pictures. This is on Sucker Brook in Pepperell, which is right within the Nashua River watershed. On the left is before and on the right is after. This is one on the Manhan River. And then this one here is Trap Hole Brook in Norwood, Massachusetts. So the impoundment's on the left and the restored channels on the right. Always fun to take a look at these before and after pictures. And I think that's all I have. So here's my information. I keep a list of folks interested in dam removal that I occasionally send emails to if we have an RFR or a funding opportunity. So let me know if you'd like to join the list. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Susie. And next up, we have Kristopher Houle to talk about permitting in Massachusetts.
Great. Thank you very much, Marissa, and thanks, Susie, for that great presentation. It's really fun to see some photos from some projects that I recognize from when I was with Mass Division of Ecological Restoration. So again, my name is Kristopher Houle. I'm a senior project manager with Tighe Bond. I've been here at Tighe Bond for not very long, but prior to that, as I said, I was with the Division of Ecological Restoration and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I'm kind of giving this presentation through the lens of some experiences that I gathered and gained while with my time at those 2 agencies. Now I have to say, when I was asked to present on dam removal permitting in 10 minutes, I thought, wow, that's impossible. But it was fun to try to find the highlights, come up with the elevator speech of what is most important when it comes to just dam removal permitting, and what messages do I want you to walk away with this presentation from. So this presentation is a portion of one that I gave back in October, a longer 30-minute type presentation. So at the end of it, you'll see that there's a link to a full version of this presentation. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about that, but I'll come back to that later in the presentation. So today, you'll learn how permitting for dam removal works in Massachusetts. I'll discuss that the design and permitting processes are closely linked, and that permitting can be time-consuming and costly, but it doesn't have to be. Early planning, the key to that is early planning and coordination, and I'll explain that a bit more here. So first, a little background regarding the regulatory climate in Massachusetts. Over the last decade, there's been significant improvement in the climate and culture around dam removal permitting. So in 2014, Mass DEP issued revisions to their Wetlands Protection Act that attempted to try to streamline dam removal permitting. They created a category of projects known as ecological restoration projects, which dam removals fall under. And what that did was kind of help to provide a clear list of conditions for a project and help expedite the review at the local level for these projects. Because if you think back 10, 20 years ago, there weren't that many dam removals that were done here in Massachusetts. That, of course, has changed over the last 10 years or so. Unfortunately, though, there was those changes to the Wetlands Protection Act were very visionary at the time, but those changes weren't made similar changes weren't made in other regulatory in other regulations, for example, the 401 water quality standards. So what you saw was, a great idea, but in terms of implementation, didn't really necessarily change how quickly the dam removal permitting process would take. However, this January, MEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, did implement a set of regulatory revisions that I think really helped to realize that streamlining that was envisioned back in 2014. So essentially, if your project, dam removal project, meets a set of eligibility criteria and can qualify as an ecological restoration project, you can then apply for like an expedited review through the MEPA process. More simplistic filing, and essentially a much quicker process. One quick note here, I have the photos of two guidance documents that you'll see that are dated back to December 2007. So they're a little out of date when it comes to the current regulations, but still really good information in here for helping you along the way in your dam removal process. Really good steps in terms of outlining steps that you might take. Next slide. So the main point of this slide I want to make is that I recommend starting the permitting process as early as possible and consider it as part of an iterative design process. Don't think about your project as, all right, we're going to do design and then we're going to permit it. As you make steps in your design phase, so say preliminary design, think about what aspects of permitting or what areas of steps in the permitting process that preliminary phase links up most closely with. So for example, if you might want to think about doing a pre-consultation meeting with MEPA and other regulatory agencies as you advance into that preliminary design phase. Similarly, if you go to like a 60 or 75% phase, think about what permits are most appropriate for that phase and how outcomes of that regulatory process may inform your next step or your next phase in design. And another point here is just, if you think of the size of these boxes on this slide, representing a respective level of effort, understand that permitting it's at least for these projects should be comparable to the level of effort you might put into design. It's really where the art of these projects is in this permitting process. Oftentimes, I joke, but I'm an engineer, but I joke, that the engineering is often the easiest part of these projects. It's really understanding how to link those design and permitting steps together to complete your project and the design phase of your project in a timely manner, and make sure you don't get tripped up when it comes to implementation. And then lastly, think about permitting all the way through your project. Don't just, if you get your permits in hand, just don't think, all right, we're done. You need to make sure you include any sort of conditions that might be included as part of those issued permits into your design strategies, your design plans, as well as the bidding process, so the contractors have that information and can bid that appropriately. If you leave out a permit, say in a bid package, and it has some conditions that really hamper how a contractor may think of approaching their project, then that could set you up for a big change order or something when it comes to construction. So, but then also, once you're done with your project, don't think you're done. In terms of construction, don't think you're done with the permitting process. Understand that these projects have monitoring requirements, both short-term and long-term. So you might have to provide as-built plans or photo documentation of your project and provide that back to the regulatory agencies. Alternatively, you might have to do long-term vegetation monitoring or long-term photo monitoring, or prove that you are successful in fish passage. So just always be thinking about it through every step in the process. Next slide, please. I know I'm getting short on time. So can you click one more time? Yep. So this is a busy slide. I'm not going to go into it in full detail, refer back to that full version of the presentation. There's a lot of, the point here is the green boxes are the major steps or aspects to the permitting process, whereas the red text is the approvals or permits that you might need that relate to those issues. In terms of this slide, again, this is one in a sequence in my other presentation, but really the take-home message here is in order to make your permitting process easier, you need to establish clear goals and clear objectives and communicate that to your regulatory agencies. So for example, if you want to remove, if your objective is to remove, or excuse me, if your goal is to provide fish passage, your objective will be to remove the full vertical or extent of the dam. Or if your goal is to improve water quality, your objective on how you're going to do that is dredge sediment. Similarly, if your goal is to eliminate public safety risks, you propose to stabilize surrounding infrastructure around the dam. You need to describe your existing and proposed conditions, identify those regulatory resources that are around your project, and predict those anticipated changes. So for example, if you have a large dam impoundment and you remove the dam and you expect your land under water to change and change to bordering vegetated wetlands, you need to sort of depict that, show it through your base mapping and delineations. You want to make sure to define your construction methods, best practices, and your sequences of work. So for example, how will the work get done? How are you going to access your site? Where are you going to stage materials that you're going to bring on the site, like rock? Where are you going to stage materials that you might need to take off, like dredge sediment? Excuse me. How are you going to control water on the site? How are you going to make sure you're, maybe working in the dry, dewatering the site for when you're actually trying to remove the dam? So all things you need to be thinking about and communicating early. You want to quantify those impacts, those resource areas. So using that same example about changing land underwater to bordering vegetated wetlands, you need to make sure you're just quantifying that and discussing it as a either a permanent or a temporary impact. The good thing about the Wetlands Protection Act is it recognizes changes to these resource areas as what they are, changes, not necessarily losses for projects like this. So that's a huge benefit to some of those updates that were done in 2014. And then lastly, just read and understand the regulations. If you understand what the regulators are looking for as part of a application package, it'll help your process go much smoother if you are giving them what they need to do their job. And lastly, just the regulatory process is iterative, so it will evolve and be refined as your project and your design advances. And next slide. Lastly, just promote the project benefits. These are all things that the regulations support and the regulators support as well. Restore river, my project's going to restore river processes, provide fish passage, improve water quality, lead with these benefits, and explain your project sort of through that lens. Next. Not a slide I'm going to read in detail, but this is just a typical permitting roadmap that you can refer back to in the future. The columns on the left side of the screen are sort of a typical order for dam removal permits. Understand some of them are sequenced together though, so you might get one before the other, but nonetheless, just kind of think of the permits on the left as a typical order. The kind of column in the middle is the major issue that permit is concerned with, or aspects that you need to provide. And then the column on the right is just a typical time frame based on my experience, but understand that those can change significantly based on staff resources at that particular agency. So again, just refer back to this as a resource later on. Next slide. So with that, again, I mentioned a full version of this presentation is available through this link. However, if you have any questions about this, or you just want to brainstorm about your project, my contact information is at the bottom of the slide. And I'll leave you just with this photo. I you're talking about sort of access to a site and staging, and you might stare at a design plan for years and talk about it in meetings, but sort of never did I think when I was working on this project that this is how it would actually, how a requirement from a permit that said no, contractor cannot have a machine and flowing water. Never did I envision that this is kind of what this part would actually look like. Contractor bringing out a crane and putting an aqua dam in or porter dam in a river, and working within this tent. I just never expected it. One of the neatest photos, I thought. So I'll just leave you with that, and happy to take questions at the second half of this talk. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Bill Hinkley to talk about funding options for dam removals.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Hinkley, and I'm with the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. One of my roles here is to administer the Dam and Seawall Repair or Removal Program, which is one of the funding avenues that we have available for this type of work in Massachusetts. Next, please. So Susie did a very nice job of explaining the many benefits of a dam removal program or project. We really categorize these into three key benefit areas to the community. The one I'd like to talk to at first is the safety elements. Susie noted the Office of Dam Safety. This is the statewide regulator of dams in Massachusetts. And they do a really important job for everyone in the state. But one of the things that is very important to understand is that the Office of Dam Safety categorizes each dam of the 3,000 or so in Massachusetts into a number of categories based upon their potential risk to the public were it to fail, and their physical condition. So many communities are really facing, as Susie mentioned, long-term costs related to the maintenance of their dams. And it can be very costly. And then they can also, depending on the size and the hazard class of their dam, a community may be out of compliance with the regulations of the Office of Dam Safety. The Office of Dam Safety will require that a dam owner bring their dam into compliance. And one of the ways to do that is by removing the dam. And so Susie did mention a number of key ecological benefits. For this category of dam removals, the ecological benefits may be secondary to the safety benefits. Removing the dam inherently removes the potential risk to the public. And so that's one way in talking about funding going forward, a really important driver for funding. And we'll talk about some different funding sources shortly. Another way to think of a dam removal project is in terms of its climate resiliency. We have changing climate patterns, and we worry both about floods and about droughts. And so sometimes these dams will have impacts both upstream and downstream of the actual dam location. And those impacts may be seen in both high flow and low flow conditions. So that's something also to consider. And it's another way of looking at your potential funding sources. And then finally, looking at the ecological benefits of a dam removal. These, again, Susie mentioned the numerous benefits of removing a dam that it can have on the ecology of the site nearby. So those are three different ways of looking at your dam and your project. And it's very important to understand your particular structure and what is a key community benefit that's going to drive this removal project. And it could be that it's all three, but each of these categories is going to have different funding sources that is really going to be attuned to the benefits in these three categories. Next, please, Marissa. Thank you. I've put down a number of potential funding sources here, trying to outline them based on the different types of categories that may be involved. And for your benefit for later on, these ones that are in blue are actually links, so you'll be able to go back and go directly to the program source. The program I administer is called the Dam and Seawall Program at Energy and Environmental Affairs. This is primarily a safety program. Our primary job with this program is to help bring dams into compliance with the dam safety regulations. Other elements, resilience and ecological benefits, are considered, but fundamentally, we're trying to bring dams into compliance with the dam safety regs. FEMA has a similar program, and that's something, it's related to a dam category we call high hazards. And those are, it's a category of dams that they're particularly interested in. At EEA, when we think about resiliency, many of you may be familiar with the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. This is a program that provided funding for planning to identify vulnerabilities to different types of climate and weather hazards in your community, and also to help to outline potential ways to address those hazards. We have a program then that helps communities and municipalities to then implement those actions that are outlined in their plan. Dam removals may be a qualifying project for that type of a grant, but it does need to be something that's in your plan. Happy to talk about any of these later, by the way. And then we get into the ecological benefits, of which there are many, and there are likewise many different funding sources. I've outlined several here, again, both state and federal, that may be able to address the different types of ecological benefits that you have. Finally, I've put in some funding sources potentially around infrastructure. It's less common nowadays to see a dam removal on its own. Dam removal often include infrastructure upstream and downstream of the removal sites. These may involve bridges or culverts or other factors related to the actual infrastructure of getting people and materials back and forth across the river. And so I put in a couple of different potential funding sources here that have been successfully used around dam removal projects. Next, please, Marissa. And then finally, I'd just like to address a couple of really of key cost drivers. Dam removal projects tend to be very expensive, and it is not uncommon for a dam removal project to exceed $1 million, not uncommon at all. So I just wanted to point out some things that are expensive and can add to the cost and complexity of a dam removal project. Bridges and culverts are probably some of the most expensive infrastructure that may be impacted by your project, because as the flow changes in the river from what it was to what the new future condition, you may have to mitigate against those new flow conditions. And that may involve replacing or providing countermeasures, scour countermeasures at that infrastructure, and that can be very costly. Sometimes the utilities are embedded within the dam structure, and these will need to be accounted for and oftentimes moved. In Massachusetts, contaminated sediment is a very common occurrence, and that's going to add to the cost. Poor site access is another one that, as you're considering the funding, I'm not going to go through all of these, by the way, but just want to call out a few of these items. If it's difficult to get to the structure or difficult to get machinery into the water, it can be a very costly addition to the project. A couple of other things that are key and may impact your dam removal project is ownership. Who is the actual owner of the dam? And in some cases, there may not be an owner, and that complicates things, in particular for the municipality. And some other things, roads, again, the infrastructure elements. And then the couple other things I'd just like to call out. The construction costs today are experiencing many of the same drivers that everything else is around inflation. And so the cost to remove a dam in 2023 or 2024 is substantially more expensive than it was in 2018. And so a lot of estimates going back, oh, I think we could have removed this dam in 2017 at $1 million. For instance, it's not going to increase at the pace of standard inflation. It's actually going to cost substantially more, and it's something to be aware of and something to think about as you are preparing your project. So I guess I will probably stop there, and I will hopefully I have not gone over time and move on to the next presentation with Neil.
Great, thank you so much.
All right. Can you hear me all right, Marissa? All right.
Yep.
Sounds like I'm bringing up the rear. So my name is Neil Shea. I'm the Restoration Program Director at the Ipswich River Watershed Association, and I'm going to talk to you quickly about a few things about getting public support and why it's important in these dam removal projects. So go ahead. All right, so why care about public support? So a lot of dams in our region are privately owned, and so what's stopping those private owners just from going ahead and making those projects happen? So I think that's kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about today, is why it is so important to get public support. So there's been a lot of research and kind of looking into why the more social aspects of these projects. And so I say this as a scientist, so this is definitely not my field of expertise. I've just learned a lot about these projects as I've worked on them and realized how important the social aspect is to these projects. And so every dam project is different and offers its own unique set of challenges, but one commonality, which sounds way oversimplified, is that the more support a project has, the less resistance it will counter. So, and that's the wider, the more diversity of people and partners of support that you have, the easier your project is going to go. And so, research shows that in general, people are in support of dam removals, especially in New England, but the margins narrow when the dam has a real or a perceived function. And so the perceived function is definitely a huge part of people's the people part of this. And so that's why it's important as our job as communicators and scientists and local representatives to make sure that we accurately communicate what these projects are all about. So how do you talk about these projects in a way where you can make sure those margins are in your favor if the goal is dam removal? So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So like I said, the majority of dams in New England are privately owned. So with a willing landowner, why can't you just take them out? And so the reality is that whether a dam is privately owned, publicly owned, or nobody knows who owns it, like the examples where Bill mentioned, these projects are very public. So they can have wide reaching impacts. We're not just talking about a super localized road project. Even though most of the work that's being proposed is taking place right at the dam, we're talking about impacts that can go from miles upstream or miles downstream. So you have to account for anything and everything that might be impacted, whether that's neighbors, water supply intakes, endangered species or protected resource areas, infrastructure, you name it, you're going to have to probably cover it in your project. So these projects are just divisive by nature. I think a lot of that is these projects have gotten politicized over the years. But also because they're very nuanced and there's a lot of issues to deal with. So any one of which are likely to have a passionate group of supporters or detractors. And so, and additionally, as someone who's from New England, I think dams are more closely linked with our local histories and cultures. And so, when you paint that picture of a quaint, small New England town aesthetic, a lot of times that vision can have a dam in it. And so I think there's this other part of it that is leaks into the frame. And so and in general, people don't like change, and that might be especially especially so in New England. Most people see a dam and just assume it's been there forever and therefore must be culturally historic or important. On top of that, there's a perception that the local ecosystem has adapted to the dam and created its own unique environment. But in reality, a lot of these dams have only been there for maybe 100, 150, 200 years old maximum. And the upstream ecosystem that might be there today is there in spite of the dam, not because of it. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so as a person with a heavy science background, the most important and interesting part to me is kind of distilling the science. These projects can get way heavy into the science and into the weeds. And so how do we take these projects, which typically have years of research, data collection, analysis on topics like hydraulic and hydrologic modeling, sediment transport, sediment contamination, structural engineering, and you need to distill it down to be digestible to the public. And so, feasibility studies can often number in the hundreds of pages, and you cannot expect the vast majority of people to wade through that. So a lot of these things are critical for the understanding of the project too. And so each one of these reports and aspects of that's all the study that goes into these projects will end up painting a picture about the project. So like the hydraulic modeling, it uses highly technical math and geometry equations. You're computing water levels and velocities. But at the end of the day, when somebody asks, hey, what's this upstream area upstream of the dam going to look like after the dam comes out? That's a project where, that's an example where you're going to need to know how to explain those results and why we can trust those results. And so distilling the science is hugely important. And it's key to have a lot of people who you can bounce ideas off of and make sure you're getting the right message across. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I think there's a couple. Oh, okay. So yeah, there we go. This is my last slide, I think. So similar to Chris, I presented these slides at a symposium in October too. And, when I was thinking about the social aspect of these things as a person has a science background, I think more about, at the end of the day, how do we directly message these different groups of people that we're going to have to be interacting with. And so I just kind of made this axis up where on the x-axis you have different scales of people who are against the project going all the way to the right where it's for the project. And then at the bottom you have maybe people who are a little more disengaged versus at the top people who are engaged. And so you have different kind of groups and pods of people. In the upper right, maybe you have like your project champions who are super engaged and for the project. Those are usually a small number of people. And then, the polar opposite of that group would be to the upper right, completely against the project, super vocal, highly engaged on the other end of the spectrum. And then in the middle, you have kind of a couple of groups of people where you have kind of people who might be for the project but don't know, aren't willing to say either way or come out and say for or against. And then even more in the middle, people who just kind of don't care or don't know why they should care. And so as people who are trying to push these projects forward, you have to figure out, who is your audience? What are the pros and cons to your specific dam removal, and not just ecological reasons, like Susie touched on all the reasons, not just ecology, but for community benefits, town benefits. And so you need to figure out what the most popular reasons people would want to keep the dam, just so you can see this project from multiple sides. And then really you just have to start having conversations with people. Are people afraid of change? Why are they afraid of change? Do people just want information? What's the best way to get that information to people? So I think that at the end of the day, these projects need public support. And so really it's just figuring out how to have those conversations. And I definitely want to leave some time for questions for the whole group too. So I'll stop there, but always happy to chat more if anyone wants to reach out to me directly too.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. So yes, it looks like we have some time for the questions we have in the chat. Just pulling this up.
I can get us started if you want, Marissa.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So there were a number of people that asked if they could have copies of the slides, and I just want everyone to know that we're going to send all the participants the slide presentation afterwards, and I believe we'll probably be able to post it on our website as well. And somebody also asked if they could use parts of the presentations in their work in the community. And I maybe each of our guest speakers could speak to that, or let us know afterwards and we can let others know maybe. Yeah, it's Chris, you're unmuted. Why don't you start?
Yeah, in terms of that, feel free to share my slides with whoever requests them. In terms of using it externally, I mean, I don't know that there's necessarily a lot in my presentation. So it might be more beneficial for you as a practitioner to maybe just kind of start more of a dialogue. So feel free to reach out with me. I'd be happy to help you in your specific examples.
Susie?
Yeah, absolutely. Please share my slides. Folks can certainly use them. I would say probably with credit, particularly on the photos and things like that. I should probably go back through my slides and make sure I also credited all of the folks who took the pictures and everything like that. But yeah, with credit, I think that's fine. Thanks.
Bill, how about you? Yep, you're nodding.
Yeah, that's fine. Same as Susie.
Yeah, and same for Neil. Okay, great. So far we only have one other, or there are two things. Yeah, they would acknowledge the author. One of the commenters is saying. So we have one question here, and that is, are there opportunities within the permitting world to allow sediments not to necessarily only be dredged out from behind the dam and the impoundment, but to come downstream over time with the flow of the water?
I'm happy to take that if that's okay, Jessica.
Yep.
Well, first I'll just say, it depends a bit in terms of which state you're working in. So I'm going to answer this from the Massachusetts perspective. I see that there's somebody from New Hampshire as well. So, it's important to first consult with your state regulatory agencies on this question. But the short answer is yes, definitely. You want to, when you're doing your initial sediment sampling, it is incredibly important to not only do sampling at your site, but to frame that within the context of the watershed, as you alluded to in your question. And if you, the sort of the nuance to that though is you need to be thinking about, all right, if you are doing downstream release, what are going to be the potential impacts associated with that? Is there infrastructure that you might be concerned about plugging up, or just kind of give you a hypothetical, are you washing sediment downstream and there's a marina nearby that is going to be angry if you're doing that? Similarly, if you're washing sediment downstream, what impacts might that have to native species, threatened species that might be utilizing the river? So you need to be thinking about all those things. So it's not just a simple yes or no. Rather, it's up, the burden's on you or the proponent or the consultant team to sort of make the argument for the best approach based on the set of criteria that you want to be looking at and thinking about when doing one of these projects.
Could I add to that, Jessica?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, similarly as how it's not an easy yes or no, I would say there's not also only the two options of dredge or send it all downstream. So there's nuance there as well in the options that you have. You can do slow drawdowns of the impoundment to let the sediment stabilize in place, and use turbidity curtains to hold sediment back in certain areas where you might have contaminants, or there can be other opportunities and other options. So yeah, hard answer because it's all nuanced.
Right. Thank you. We have one more question here. And it's from Heather at Oars. What is your advice on working with dams that either an owner cannot, or the owner cannot be located, or the owner, as identified through the Office of Dam Safety, is disputing the ownership? Anybody can step up, but maybe Bill is the right one for this.
I'll just say that this is, there's no right answer. There's no good answer. This is a really difficult issue, both in Massachusetts and elsewhere. These abandoned dams or these disputed dams are not really that uncommon at all. And So I guess the first thing that's at least, if it's an abandoned dam, and the first thing to do is, I would say, be in touch with the Office of Dam Safety to see if it is abandoned or if it just appears that way. You have to be very cognizant of the rights of the owners. And the municipality, sometimes in many cases, if the dam is abandoned, has been in some ways caretaking it at taxpayer expense for some time. One of the things that a municipality can do, especially if they're in a situation where they are acting as the de facto caretaker of an abandoned dam, a lot of these studies that are going to be required to consider a dam removal are non-invasive, and you are able to consider these projects without actually physically touching the dam. You can do a sediment analysis, you can look at the bathymetry, you can run your H&H reports, you can do quite a lot of work before actually getting into that really ugly, hairy question of now what? And in some cases, that can be resolved. But I would just say that there's that just because the dam appears to be abandoned or is in fact abandoned doesn't necessarily stop the progress. You can really start to do some investigations on this dam without actually owning it. I'll pass it off to others for some additional advice on this one.
You said it well, Bill. One thing I'll add is that last slide in my presentation and over is one dam removal that I'm familiar with that the owner was, that sort of scenario, non-responsive owner, never, not necessarily contesting ownership, just totally unresponsive. And in that case, the town of Andover did a formal taking of the dam right prior to removal in order to remove it. So, they were active partner throughout the whole process, permitting process, and design process, and fundraising. And then once the project was ready to go to construction and they saw there wasn't going to be, big overages or something compared to the funding they had, they did that formal taking and implemented the project. So there is precedent, but as Bill said, it's very complicated and certainly some of the harder ones, to make big progress on, at least in the short term.
Thanks, Chris. We have a few more questions, and I'm gonna jump the line to somebody I know that's from a municipality, and then come back to the others. Tom Delaney asks, earlier in the year there was an RFP to request if anybody was interested in removing their dams for reconnaissance study. Has this been finalized and released yet? And it's from the town of Groton. Maybe Susie might know.
I think that one's for me, and we have not announced the selected projects yet, but hopefully it will come out soon. And that's all I can say.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll go back to the other questions and let you off the hook there. So from Ralph, he asks, can you please comment on the degree to which dam removal either increases or decreases the property values of those who abut the impoundment? I'm not really sure who would like to answer this, so anybody please speak up.
I can talk a little bit about it just because we're working on a project right now where that has come up from abutters. Working on a project where the mill pond has lots of houses and neighborhoods on it. And again, current theme in all these answers is that there's not a good answer. And so what we found though is that we did kind of a full look into all the deeds on all the properties along the impoundment there, and it pretty much differs by each deed where their property line extends to. So on a case-by-case basis, you may have some people whose property line, is the edge of the river no matter where it is, and others it might be a little bit more complicated than that. And so, but in short, I think what's been found in other studies is that dam removals don't really have a significant impact either way on improving or decreasing property values. There's been studies that show both, studies that show neither. And so it's really super site dependent. A lot of people value having, a running river going through their properties, whereas a lot of people also value having, an impoundment that they can access easily too. So it's really site specific is what I've found at least.
Great, thanks, Neil. We have several more questions. I know that we've reached 1 o'clock, so people if they need to leave, please do, but we'll continue with the questions we have. Marissa, does that sound good? Okay.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so from Matthew Cranny, we have, are there any plans for ODS or any other state agency to release an updated map of dam locations with known ownership information? Bill?
I do know that the Office of Dam Safety is working on updating their dam GIS layer. I don't know the progress of that, but I do know that they're working on it.
Okay, great, thanks. Peter Cunningham from Groton asks, if a dam has failed and the owner is not accepting responsibility, what options are available to the town?
Jessica, if it's okay with you, I'd like to drop a link in the chat that I think will help answer that question.
Excellent, yep.
There's a document that Harvard Law Clinic put out that I think is useful. So hopefully that went through, and you can review that document.
Okay.
Did that?
Yep, I see it. If everybody looks in the sort of in the chat box in the answered tab there, you can see the link right there. And if people if that's not sufficient, they want additional information, we can just email any of us and we'll get you more information. Okay, so Deb Chisholm writes, what justification is needed when removing a dam that would reduce the impoundment size and impact habitats in the area?
Yeah, I would just say, the Wetlands Protection Act in 2014 revisions, were really focused around that primary question of just how do you account for changes in resource areas as opposed to loss of resource areas, right? You change an impoundment. I kind of gave this example in my presentation. You're changing an impoundment from land underwater, which is one regulated resource, to say bordering vegetated wetland or floodplain or one of the other many regulated resources. So it's just kind of communicating those changes, and so that is very much approved and appropriate with the Wetlands Protection Act, as well as the comparable federal regulations.
Okay, great. And I know that Deb is from New Hampshire, so I don't know if anyone, maybe Susie or Chris, if you have any other New Hampshire specific resources that, or just to look to the New Hampshire, the DES's rules on wetland rules and so forth, be the answer for that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I haven't worked at that level in New Hampshire, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's obviously a different state, but they are doing a lot of dam removals too. So there are a few great contacts that I could recommend at New Hampshire DES. But I would say just Google New Hampshire DES dam removal, and there's kind of a similar program to like a Mass DER up there. It's a little smaller, but great resources for you there.
Great, thanks. I think that those are all the questions we have in the chat. So maybe a last call for questions. I'm just going to jump in here. Maybe Marissa was going to say this, but we at the National River Watershed Association want to let everyone know that that we're here to help also with any dam removal projects that you want to get started. And I'm sure all of our guest speakers are as well. So first steps might be to contact one of these great people that's here today, or just to contact us, and we can start helping you down that road. And with that, Marissa, it is your stage. So please take it away.
Yes, I just want to say thanks so much to our presenters for being here today. This was a very helpful presentation, and I can tell it's going to be really useful for the folks that joined. And yeah, thanks for everyone for being here. We will share the recording and a copy of the presentation so that everyone has access to these resources. But we really appreciate you being here today.